This roundtable series is called Exposing the Failure of Empire and Reclaiming the Narrative Creation Process. These were inspired by The Valediction by Paul Fitzgerald and Elizabeth Gould. Book 1, which is out, is subtitled 3 Nights of Desmond. Book 2, coming next year, is subtitled Resurrection. Empires are built by the use of force, which makes rulers insane, and they are maintained by controlling the narrative, often no matter what the facts might be. This is roundtable number 4, Into the Mystic, the murder of JFK, and how it relates to the Valediction. Our panelists are our host, Kris Millegan of TrineDay, who has published around 120, 140 books in the last 20 years. Information, stories, well documented, well researched that the mainstream does not want us to see. Also, Paul Fitzgerald and Elizabeth Gould, who were the first American journalists to enter Afghanistan in 1981 after the Soviet invasion in December of '79. Sean Stone, filmmaker, Greystone Park, A Century of War and documentaries, co-host of Conspiracy Theory with Jesse Ventura and the RT News show Watching the Hawks, and the author of New World Order, A Strategy of Imperialism. Also, Sarah Whalen, journalist, attorney, and author of Royal Vengeance, The Assassination of Princess Diana and the Ancient Royal Cult of Human Sacrifice. Also, S.K. Bain, author of the most dangerous book in the world, 9/11 as Mass Ritual. Also, The End is Only the Beginning, 2022 and the Coming of God, and other books. And I'm Bruce. I wrote a book called God School, 9/11 and JFK, The Lies That Are Killing Us and the Truth That Sets Us Free. You can read about it at brucethetaurus.com and get it at TrineDay. And I ask you, Kris, to please tell us what you will to launch this roundtable.
Well, first off, I want to thank everybody for coming and attending. And I want to start off with a couple of quotes from JFK. And we've all heard these before, but I think it's very important because he's not with us anymore, no matter what some people say. For in the final analysis, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's future, and we are all mortal. He gave that as his strategy of peace at American University. The other quote is, "The great enemy of truth is very often not the lie, deliberately contrived and dishonest, but the myth, persistent, pervasive, and unrealistic. Too often we hold fast to the cliches of our forebears. We subject all facts to a prefabricated set of interpretations. We enjoy the comfort of opinion without the discomfort of thought." I mean, did we lose a great man when he was murdered in Dallas, Texas, over 53 years ago? And would our world be a bit different if he had been allowed to do his job? And, it's been very interesting doing what I'm doing, publishing books, because, books are very, very important. They just, they kind of sit there, people pick them up, and books change people's lives. People change people's lives. And I got the book Valediction from Paul and Liz, and I read through it and I says, this is quite amazing, because the story takes us beyond what we've been living in, beyond what they've been trying to force us in. It takes us beyond it into the mystic. Now, what is the mystic? Mystic is where we are all one. We are all one. We're all together. And what we do, affects other people. And, we've been living in this world where the powers in control are basically controlling us through lies. Okay. And they'll get, somebody here to believe their lie. And then they'll put out another lie and they'll get somebody out here. And then we've got us here fighting about silly lies. Okay. And, one thing that I want to also talk about is some of the stuff that's got us here. And I posted an article about, it's from Truth and Fiction in the Da Vinci Code. And it talks about the Dead Sea Scrolls and apocalypticism. I don't know how you say that word. But, a big problem is dualism. Okay. In other words, thinking, okay, I'm right and they're wrong. Okay. And it just, it gets us fighting each other. There's a good reason why, if you look at most of the quote unquote religions in the world and philosophical things, they talk very strongly about three, about a trinity. Okay. Because dualism, causes a lot of problems in our thought and gets us, fighting each other. And the powers that be know that. So they use that. So they get us in little camps. And like I've said before, they give the right honest things to carry. They give the left honest things to carry. And then by having them fight each other, it gets all debased. Okay. Another big part is pessimism. Okay. A lot of people think, well, heck, the world's going to heck in a handbasket. There's nothing I can do. Well, sure enough, there's something you can do. Everybody can always change how they act. Okay. Because that's where it gets down to. It gets down to how you and I and everybody acts towards each other and what we do. Vindication. Okay. People are always trying to, well, my side's right, so it's got to, I've got to vindicate it. Okay. And another thing is imminence. Okay. It's happening tomorrow. Well, I've had the good fortune of being on this earth right here for 72 years. And one thing I've noticed is that change does happen, but it takes time. It takes time. It takes concerted effort. It takes people trying to do something. And so I'm very happy to be here and to be doing this roundtable where we're trying to get, people's understandings and get beyond this crazy world that we've been living in where people create empires, then they, fight each other and all kinds of, and there's really no reason for it. I mean, we have the resources and we do have the understandings, but they get all muddled up. So onwards.
Thank you, Kris.
Onwards. Yeah, thank you, Kris.
Paul and Liz, I pass the baton and the spotlight your way.
Well, thank you, everybody, for coming today. It's great to see you. We are certainly living at the historic end of something, and the valediction is the farewell. And so I think it's only appropriate that that's what we're going to talk about today, because there is a mystical component to life. There is a mystical component to what we've experienced. And we also feel very strongly and have experienced the fact that there's a mystical component to JFK, his family, the Fitzgerald aspect of his family. And we have experienced it on numerous occasions personally, and we wanted to share that in our book. So, why I came up with this idea, who I am, what I am. I was a singer when I was 10 years old, and I got an idea. I used to get people would come to me and they would tell me how inspired they were by my voice. We wrote a book in numerous years ago, about 30 years ago at this point, called The Voice, which was about the mystical aspects of the Fitzgerald family and what it meant to us and to the world around us. So I'm going to start by reading this just short piece that we wrote to try to sum up what the Valediction Book 2 is all about. Valediction Book 1 is about Afghanistan, and the behind the scenes story that occurred that we became very much involved in and aware of over the course of being in Afghanistan in the 1980s during the Soviet occupation, and then going back there again and after the American occupation in 2002, which was really quite a span. But I'll read this and then we can move on from there. Since 1963, the analysis of JFK assassination hasn't moved very far outside a narrow discussion. Despite staggering wealth of information provided by researchers over the last 60 years, the mainstream arguments are still confined to the lone gunman theory or an assortment of conspiracies between Cuban Americans, the mafia, the CIA, and/or the military-industrial complex, all of whom had motives for wanting to see JFK dead. I recall that even as JFK's campaign began, it was obvious to see that religious attacks on him were beyond the politics as usual mode. Political cabals in the US were already opposed to a Catholic becoming president long before JFK announced his candidacy. The election was the final straw for those who believed America was a Masonic state created for those fleeing Rome's persecution of a medieval knighthood known as the Knights Templar. How did this happen? On October 13, 1307, the French king, Philip IV, who was deeply in debt to the Templars for financing his wars, ordered them arrested and charged with heretical practices. Then on November 22nd of that year, under pressure from King Philip, Pope Clement V issued the papal bull Pastoralis Praemunentii, instructing all the monarchs of Europe to seize their assets. When the last Templar Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, was burnt at the stake by the Pope's inquisitors in 1314, it would serve as an inspiration to generations of heretics dedicated to overthrowing the papacy. In 2016, we published an article stating it was time to stop the revenge and retribution cycle that led to the justification for killing JFK, and we received this statement from a self-described heretic in response. Quote, "This country was created by Freemasons to escape the killing machinery of the Roman Catholic Church. The United States of America exists as a place of refuge from the Catholic killing machinery. It was created as a safe haven from which to launch a counter-war on the church, hence separation of church and state. And yes, JFK, a Catholic, was taken out because of a history beyond his control. Who would allow a Catholic to run a Masonic refuge? So no, we will not forget and we do not forgive an evil institutional empire of conquest and profit and power. It is our work to bring it to a halt. That is no church of Jesus. Satan is more like it. Non nobis domine, non nobis sed nomine. Not to us, Lord, not to us, but to your name give the glory." The time has come to broaden the perspective on the motives behind the JFK murder. The Fitzgerald dynasty began with the 1097 marriage of Gerald of Windsor to Nest, daughter of Rice ap Tudor, King of South Wales. The marriage was arranged under the auspices of King William Rufus, the son of William the Conqueror. As a Tudor princess, Nest's lineage traced back to the mythical Celtic court of Arthur, forming the basis of the Grail legends associated with the presidency of JFK. On August 2nd, 1100, in the New Forest, King William Rufus was slain by an arrow shot by an assumed familiar. Although everyone knew who'd shot the arrow, no one was ever held accountable. It is believed by some that Rufus knowingly accepted his fate and became a sacred sacrifice to inaugurate Britain's aspirations for empire that required both political and the mystical power of the Grail narrative to keep them running. Our premise, which we will be exploring in the Valediction Resurrection, is that like William Rufus, JFK's murder fits a pattern of sacred sacrifice. Whoever really killed JFK on November 22nd, the Masonic Day of Revenge for the destruction of the Knights Templar, was allowed to escape. But more important, like Rufus, JFK's actions seem to indicate he accepted his fate, and he too became a sacred sacrifice. Our thesis today for panelists and guests is, did JFK's assassination complete a Grail cycle that William Rufus inaugurated with the marriage of Gerald and Nest and the creation of a Fitzgerald dynasty in 1097 AD. Thank you.
Thank you. The next two panelists are Sarah and Sean, and I want you to indicate who's most inspired and filled and ready to speak into what you just heard. I need a volunteer. Sarah, I'm going to say ladies.
Sarah?
Sarah, you're on mute. Sean's off mute. Sarah, you're on mute.
Okay.
I think Sarah, I was going to say, I mean,
There we go.
Go-
Am I off mute? Can you hear me?
Yes, you're off mute.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, I think the cycles, with all due deference to your ancestor, Fitzgerald, the cycles you're talking about are much older. They transcend anything going on with the Grail, although certainly the Grail is an idea about things that are far more ancient. And, but I do completely agree with the idea of JFK being, a target, because certainly his Roman Catholicism, even though I wouldn't describe him as a good Catholic, he was born a Catholic. And so that's a later dilemma that comes when the church splits. And obviously America, it was not a Catholic country. It's not founded as a Catholic nation, although it's certainly become, very predominantly Catholic, in certain regions. But I think the cycles you're talking about are much older, thousands, millennia older. And what you're seeing is a modern interpretation of what happened in ancient times with the killing of the king. And your ancestor Fitzgerald is interesting to me. After Rufus, who I think did acknowledge himself as a sacrifice, and he was really a pretty devout pagan. If you examine his life and his sayings carefully, he was not embracing Christianity in any sense. And he came from a pagan tradition where, money was, of course, used to found monasteries. And but that was more like a banking practice, and the Christian church was the one who held the bank. Pagans didn't really hold their money that way. I have to think a little more, because you said many things that are very profound. But has the cycle carried over to modern life? Yes. And I think JFK's assassination was proof of that. And, regardless of what conspiracy you may think did it, to me, whether it's Cuba or mafia, or these are all manipulations of certain groups by what I would call the inner secret circle. Some people call it the hidden hand. They can manipulate, and they're willing to take a really long view of history, so they can wait. It used to be when Rufus was king, you had a 7-year cycle, 9 years if you were in France. This has changed. Modern life has necessitated certain time changes, but they will target someone. And sometimes the target is willing, they understand. Other times the target is not willing. For instance, Thomas Becket. Your ancestor, Fitzgerald, goes to Ireland, and he's one of a group of Norman nobles. And of course, the Normals were these big intruders into the English system, but they had a similar pagan system. When Henry II went to Ireland, he really fled because Becket had been assassinated at his order. 4 magnates carried out the actual act, but there were many others who were involved in it. And all those people took off. Ireland was a place nobody wanted to go. And Henry, of course, had the excuse that he needed to pacify Ireland. And he ended up there for
Sarah,
a
do you
period of
have-
years. So I don't want
Do
to
you-
talk too much, but I agree with you. I think there are more details. I think it's way older than any Arthurian history.
But what's your, and probably succinctly, so we can handle everything and everyone, what do you have to say about the assertion so far that life, reality, existence has this mystical, spiritual component? Briefly.
That's the human world from time immemorial. Look at the caves of Lascaux in France. They're talking to something. They're talking to a divine order. They're worshiping it with fire. They're painting it on their walls. They're carving little Venus figurines to the Great Mother, who,
Yeah.
given the physicality of the figure, these are not real figures. But there's an idea and something is moving them.
Thank you so much. Sean. You are muted still.
Yeah, I'm not really clear where to weigh in, to be honest. I'd rather reserve for a more specific question.
Very good.
You have Kent.
Yes, but for Sean and all panelists to think in terms of focusing in on that bullseye of, the title and the topic, the murder of JFK, how it relates to what Paul and Liz kind of put on the table in terms of this mystical component. Coming right back to you, Sean, but yes, inviting Kent, otherwise known as the author S.K. Bain.
Well, you think you understand a subject fairly well, and then a book comes along that really blows it wide open and makes you realize you only understood it to a very shallow degree. And my second book dealt pretty heavily with the JFK assassination as mass ritual, but as I've read the first book by Paul and Liz and gotten a preview of the second book coming out next year, I realized I understood it only superficially, and the mystical aspect of the JFK assassination just is extremely interesting.
Thank you. And the view that is given in their books, and the prep we've done for these roundtables in terms of taking the given facts of reality, quote unquote history, and how our rulers use them and manipulate them to create a narrative that captures us, controls us, terrifies us. Sean, I kind of my job to squeeze the panelists in the first 45 minutes before opening it up to the second half questions and comments with the audience. At least, would you indulge us with your take on the JFK assassination in context of your book, New World Order?
It's so interesting that how much hagiography arrives, with JFK. This, he's really been vaunted into this sainted position by the left, not to the left, I should say, more liberal consciousness, and romanticized in ways that I think are beyond the pale, beyond what is realistic with him. My indication would be that he was ritually sacrificed, and I think he knew it. I think in a way his whole family knew it. we know now about his illnesses that he had, his various debilitating issues with the spine, having to wear these braces and things to keep him propped up. He had so much pain he could barely bend down some days, they say. Addison disease, I believe, amongst other issues, that he was a sickly person in a way that obviously no one at the time knew. And very flawed man. Let's be clear, right? His relationship with women is a clear indication of that. Marilyn Monroe in particular, and how he treated her, I think, is just one of many examples of the chauvinism of that time. And it's, again, it's not to say that he's evil. It's just that's it does reflect some aspect of his consciousness and his morality. What we see with Vietnam, certainly was he more restrained than Johnson? Absolutely. Was it clear that he was not trying to be at the behest of the military-industrial complex and awaking to that through his administration? Yes, those years were indicative, right, from the Bay of Pigs informing him, as we all know, about the CIA and why he fired Dulles and why he threatened to splinter it to 1,000 pieces, and understanding more and more of the deep state as he got into it. I tend to think that his greatest sin may have been the desire to, not as a person I'm saying, but from the perspective of the establishment, may have been that desire to issue currency directly from the U.S. Treasury, right? This whole executive order near the end of his life was it an executive order? Or I think it was an executive order, but it was certainly an agreement that he was coming to, right, with the Indonesian president at the time. I think that was Sukarno, right? Suharto took after, yeah. So Sukarno, to basically get the gold to back the Treasury issuing currency, which would have completely threatened the entire nature of our system, right? Which is to basically be, to be accepting loans from a private banking system, the Federal Reserve operation, to be accepting loans, and to basically indebt your entire future generations of taxpayers, never-ending debt cycles, right? And to be beholden to to their printing schemes and control of the currency. So that, I think, may have been the biggest trigger, in a sense, to get rid of him. Certainly there's questions about the aliens. This is always an interesting one that comes up. Would he have disclosed? I don't think that he would have disclosed. I think that he understood too that there was a certain level of, there's a certain game that had to go on. And so that's why I always say there's a hagiography, because it's like he would have changed everything. There's a system and an establishment, and I think that we're coming to learn that more and more as consciousness evolves over time. And what's so interesting is that people have played into so much of this hatred of presidents, as Kris talked about, the left versus right, and how that's been manipulated so much, because there's this belief that this president's going to change things. This president is going to, but without understanding that the executive is literally that. He's a CEO. He's a chief executive officer of a corporation that is the United States of America. And you have forces that are at work, and policies that are implemented that are greater than what the president can do. The president can be there to try to, inform people to a certain extent, to try to, help morale, which is one important thing I think a president does, is frankly, it shapes morale. It gives people a certain vision and hope. And that's why, there's positives to, to presidencies that even when you look at their policies as, as disastrous or as disabling as they may be, there is a certain quality of morale. But ultimately, you're looking at a system here that is so much more intricate and complex, as we have learned over time, than any one man being able to come in there and just say, I'm going to drain the swamp, or I'm going to, take on the military-industrial complex, or Kennedy could have changed history. I don't know that he could have. I really don't. I think that's part of the problem, is that we get into this idealization of things, that it could have been what could have been, as opposed to saying, no, there are cycles at work and processes that are at work that have to do with the evolution of human consciousness, of us as a collective, and what is now rolling out in terms of the New World Order agenda, which began obviously centuries before Kennedy's assassination, and obviously has outlasted him, is that this New World Order, which is the culmination of empire, it is the one world government that was talked about, and different groups have tried to steer and get control of. And actually one of the great debates that took place probably was in the turn of the 20th century between the race imperialists like Cecil Rhodes, who were Anglo-Saxon white male imperialists saying the empire is going to be a British empire, and the socialists, the Fabian socialists like who was H.G. Wells and others, saying no, it's going to be a one world, non-denominational. We're going to bring the blacks in. We're going to bring the Asians in. We're going to bring the different religions into this.
Speaking of bringing other
Yeah.
things into it, thank you for that. And now it's we still have time. This is when all the panelists can still pick up on what you've heard, contribute or comment further. Sean, I would squeeze out of you. You've alluded to it, and I'm hearing every word you're saying. You're mentioning consciousness and the evolution of consciousness. But like I asked Sarah for some kind of a statement of her metaphysics, as ham-fisted as that might be, because I've heard other interviews with you and am most intrigued and in agreement with what I took to be a statement of your metaphysics to the topic of today, into the mystic. How impactful are our intentions, our thought, our will? Like Kris said at the top, reality is a oneness. Can you speak into that very long-winded and perhaps confusing question?
Reality is a oneness. Is that what your question? Or is it's a unique experience. Reality, I say, there is no reality except your own experience of reality. So your reality is different than my reality, and that's the beauty. This is what, just to speak very quickly on my metaphysics, why I'm so opposed to New World Order. I'm so opposed to these imperial systems, these imperial models of dictates telling people everyone must do this, everyone must, you name it, get the vaccine, walk this way, think this way. This is is anathema to the nature of the experience of consciousness, which is being in a physical form. That is a unique experience. My experience will always be unique to yours, and we must honor that. Otherwise, you end up with this roboticized agenda, which is, one world. Not in the spirit of we are all one, but, again, at the metaphysical, at the level of God, we're all connected, sure. But if we can't honor the one that is I, the one that is you, the one that is she and him and her, if we can't honor each one, we can never honor that one that is greater than all.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm still focusing on the panelists here. Everyone's got these warm, very content smiles. Liz, I see a hand.
Yeah, I have my hand up. Well, I think, to actually further extend, I think what we are referring to when we use the language of the sacred sacrifice and tying these things together, what we're really trying to do is really bring what really is in the form of JFK is a metamyth, okay? And what we're trying to let you know is we're working at it from a personal level. And we're trying to see how to connect the evolution of what became, and by the way, Sean, your point about JFK and his personal life, I think you could say the same thing probably about almost any famous person. So I don't think those issues are the real point about when an individual captures the imagination of the people at the level that JFK has. And then you go back into this history that takes you back to the origin of this connection, this ideal called the Grail mythologies, which, and Sarah, we certainly know well, they really go back to the Mithraic rituals and are really deeply connected. This would go back thousands of years. So we know that the history didn't start, okay, with the Fitzgerald family, obviously, but in terms of this sort of alpha and omega between the origin of this family, beginning with this real connection to this Welsh princess, that there is this association, and that how that manifests through eventually the Norman invasion of Ireland in 1170 that inaugurated this family into becoming what's called the Sean Gael, which is more Irish than the Irish. So when you take these warring Norman warriors who enter a country and become more Irish than the Irish, something magical happened. And I'm sure they weren't all perfect either.
So it's kind of a hitchhiker's guide to the mystical.
Right, but it's personal. You see, I think that's our point. If you can't find a personal avenue into your research, there's a level at which you're not really engaging the most important part of the story. And that's what we were able to do. When we entered into Afghanistan, it was an out there story. It was geopolitical. It was filled with all kinds of very serious, conspiracies that were quite real in the form of the fraud that the Soviets really did, in fact, create the greatest threat to peace since the Second World War when they invaded Afghanistan, which was what President Carter announced, practically the day of the invasion. And, so the whole history around that was something that when we experienced this, the reality that somehow the story really was, the narrative was being created out of thin air. This was in 1981, 1982, 1983. This is long before I think people really had the kind of blanket question marks about the mainstream media. We were inside the mainstream media witnessing the actual manufacturing of this phony narrative.
And Liz, if everyone kind of is very up to speed with what you just said, would you take a moment to talk about how the narrative creation, the narratives we're being told in a general way by our quote unquote rulers are descending into more and more, I don't know, lunacy? And where's the hope for us to take the lessons that you and Paul learned in the last 40 years? Throw us a bone here.
Okay, I got my bone. Well, that is actually the whole point about walking through the 80s into the 90s, when we really began to question why we even got into the story. And that's when we started a real authentic journey that led us right into the mystical. We just walked right into it. It was just part of what we began to understand. And so the idea that what we're now finding is a way to interpret, the assassination of JFK as a final act of revenge and retribution, as a final, this is the way it had to end because this is the way it began. And that's the idea when you go back to the methodology of the royals who basically prepared themselves to either die or have one of their close associates or relatives die in order to gain the power of empire. And now we're coming to the end of the cycle. And I personally feel, this is the way I describe, this is not just the end of American empire, this is the end of empire itself. And I do believe that JFK's assassination can be viewed in that context. And that's why when we got the this response from the heretic about why they had to kill JFK, we realized what we were up against.
And in our planning meetings for these roundtables, I've heard you say this, yes, the end of empire has it's ending, or we have to help it end. And in general, it's the use of force. It's when some humans think they've got the right to use force over others. That has got to end. And you do see that it's happening. And the more that you're talking about it is because the more everyone is consciously aware of, we've got to love each other as ourselves. It goes back to what Kris said at the beginning. We're one people on this one planet. It touches on what Sean talked about at a deeper level of reality. I'm interpreting you, Sean, now. There is just a field of consciousness which wants to know itself and functions in a healthy way where all can be free when each incarnation of it, this is Bruce's metaphysics, loves each other incarnation of it as itself, as oneself.
Right, but we're still, the old paradigm is still clinging to us. I think of this as like in terms of, when a fetus is getting ready to be born, all right? The womb basically can only sustain that fetus for a maximum of maybe, weeks, by the end of the cycle. If that fetus stays in that womb too long, that womb will kill that fetus after that point. Well, think of it that way. We are literally dripping with this old womb that we have used up, that we need to get out of, but it's like clawing on us. It's clinging to us.
Isn't it clinging to us because the psycho rulers who want to rule us, the elite of the elite, aren't they terrified of losing their power and their control over us? And don't they suffer the most from the illusion that they are separate from us? They don't feel or experience that the harm they're inflicting on us. They are constraining themselves.
I think that what we're, again, it's just like the womb that's dying. They do what they do. They don't realize that they're putrefied. They don't realize that they are over, like the womb that's killing the fetus. This actually was the vehicle that carried the fetus for the full, term. And then at the end, if the womb is not, if the fetus doesn't leave, that's when the danger happens. And
so what do you say? What do you say to the fetus? What do you say to that fetus?
Get out, but this is the point but the getting out process, I think, in terms of this, in the complexity of the human, obviously the total experience, is that we are living with something that hasn't been ended properly. I like to think that what we're living through is a bad ending. And when you have a proper ending, everything just collapses and the new can then emerge. That's why we feel this reinterpretation of the assassination of JFK put in the context of the sacred sacrifice and factoring in the reality of that. And that's why we felt this heretic that wrote us this note in 2016 was so important for us to really connect with.
I want to connect
with his reality.
I want to connect for another moment on the metaphor of the baby being encouraged to get out if it's being strangled by this womb that wants to keep it. And that's very dualistic. Kris talked at the top about, us versus the rulers who are imposing this control on it. Kris, do you have an insight into something along those lines?
Let me just make one quick comment about my metaphor, which I want to make sure is clear. I don't think the womb is doing anything right or wrong. I think it's just continuing to do what it did, but it doesn't know it's poison now. That's what I'm saying about this empire. Okay, we have a term for it. We're in late stage imperial dementia. When imperial thinking makes you crazy, at the beginning it's great, at the end it's horrible. Okay,
it makes it makes the emperors crazy.
Well, because the imperial mind, okay, is so overloaded with power and with the ability to use it and mesmerizing and all of that. And so we know that there's something about the imperial mind. I think, when you mentioned Cecil Rhodes, I mean, the term mystical imperialism was actually created for Cecil Rhodes. The idea of using that kind of power. And I love how you've described how it leads to dementia. And I see it even in the victim, which is the baby or the 99% of humanity that wants to be healthy and wants to be free. And there again, it comes into this dualistic us versus them kind of thing, which Kris is a great coach against that. I default to love is the answer. We have to love the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab the way he can't love himself and can't love us. No, but think of him as the womb that has to, figure out that it's over. Okay, he's carrying the old paradigm and just keeping up using it.
Yes, as he's tightening.
I can think of nothing less in the world that would be good for me or the rest of humanity than to view Klaus Schwab as the end all and be all of existence. I don't want the world to end with Klaus Schwab. Let me put it that way.
No, but I'm reminded of Kissinger's quote about his observation about Nixon. Can you imagine if somebody loved this man?
I mean, we're dealing with the same kind of mentality.
But it's
really
imperial thinking. They're all imperialists. They all have bought into it. They all have been completely seduced by it. Okay.
These guys are making Brzezinski look like an enlightened figure.
All right. And so Paul and Liz, if this were the last 5 minutes of the roundtable, what would you encourage us to go forth and multiply? How do we balloon in our confidence and hope about what to do with the present state of the world?
I said, the thing you have to first do is figure out why you are attracted to doing what you're doing. What are you doing it for? Are you in your own story? I think that's the way I put it. We were forced into our own story by the reality we confronted when we saw the way the inside system really created our American narratives.
But we did have a mystical experience that was
tell about the dream.
That was inexplicable.
That did push us on the course.
It did. It certainly helped along the way.
The dream.
A dream.
Scottish bell bottoms.
It was a dream, and it was very influential in terms of what we decided to do. From my perspective, I don't know, maybe Liz should tell the story. I'll give you my, and I heard our daughter yelling at 7 o'clock in the morning as Liz was waking her up for school. Liz?
Okay, I go in to wake Alyssa up. She's actually, at the time, she was just about 10 years old. And I wake her up and she starts yelling at me. I was just going to get his name. I was just going to get his name. And I said, what are you talking about? She said, I had a dream. And Dad's father was there. And he brought this man with him who was wearing this funny outfit. And he told me he was 800 years old. And he asked about you, Mom. Paul's father asked about you. And he was just going to tell me his name when he woke me up. And so when Paul heard about the dream, we at that time we had walked away from the Afghanistan story and we were trying to find a new course, but we really had found that that personal tug that really pushed us into the story. And when Paul heard about the dream with his father, because you have to realize that Paul's father had died when Paul was 17, and the last conversation they had was not a good one. And the next morning he was dead. So this was a very important experience to find that his daughter gets a message from his father. And there is this man who connects him back automatically, because Paul knew right away. He said, 800 years with my father. Well, that's the Norman invasion of Ireland. That was, that's what the message was, that go back to the Norman invasion of Ireland. And so that immediately thrust Paul into a complete reevaluation, because we were looking at the esoteric history behind what was going on in the geopolitics, and we did go back in history, but this gave us a personal line right into Paul's family history, which he had heard about it, he knew vaguely about it, but suddenly we were immersed in it. And we ended up discovering a book that was written by Heraldus Cambrensis, who was he was one of the relatives who was on the Norman invasion, and he wrote books about it. So here's this real history about the Fitzgerald family, and you go into these books and suddenly you realize, well, this is about my family. This is not just history in this detached way.
My grandfather came over here at the turn of the 20th century, and he had been left in charge of the farm, and he left it in charge of his brother. And so he came over here, he led a life, he became a union leader, and he said, he went back in 1957, and his brother said, what are you going to do with the farm? What do I do with it? And so he said, you can have it. My son doesn't want it. My son being my father. And so anyway, so that was the end of that, but we still stayed in communication with these people. Now, this is a very specific part of Ireland. This is the southwest of Ireland. This is down in what's called Desmond territory. We were there in 1997, and we drove from the northeast part of the country. We went to a wedding, and then we drove down to the southwest. And during that time period, you could hear the music would go from British influenced pop music into Irish music. And by the time we got to that little village where my grandfather's farm was, it was called Abbeyfield. It was totally Irish. It was totally Celtic, completely immersed in the, and they prided themselves on it. They made me sing in the pub. One of the pubs was owned by a second cousin of mine. And he said to me, he said, what exactly, how am I related to you? And I said, my grandfather and your grandfather were brothers. And so he went, my God, he said, there's 100 people in this pub right now. And he said, I'm related to all of them, and you're more closely related to me than any of them.
Anyway, yep, no, I know, I'm sure.
So these are the kinds of things. And I had already been there. I'd seen the whole setup. There's a bombed out castle at every mile in the area. So they went through a lot of struggles to get their insight into what the world was.
Anyway, that's how we ended up eventually writing The Voice, which was the story about the mystical journey we took through dreams and through that original dream by our daughter Alyssa, and eventually ended up now here with the Valediction as the completion of that journey.
So what we did was we actually wound up getting us a research book, one of the first research books I bought, and in it was a picture of a man that fit the description of that our daughter Alyssa had said. was in her dream, was the man accompanying my father. So I showed it to her. She came home for lunch one day, and I said, Alyssa, I just got this book and there's this picture in there. And she looked at it and she went, oh, that's the guy from my dream. I went, oh, really?
Turned out his name is Alexander Gardner, and he was an adventurer who was the first American to actually end up in Afghanistan as a mercenary working for the royals of Afghanistan. He eventually became the man who Kipling used as his inspiration model for the man who would be king.
Yeah.
And he had that outfit, the exact outfit that Alyssa described, the Scottish plaid. I mean, the picture's black and white, of course, but you could see it was a Scottish plaid, flouncy hat, and the whole thing. And he made the suit himself. So that was the completion.
What would you say about the importance of us interpreting our individual lives? We are, if I'm hearing you correctly, we are the lead character in our own lives. You framed it very specifically with asking ourselves, why do I do what I do? And with that comes responsibility. With that comes power. With that comes intentionality. And no one's a victim of any aspect of one's own life. We are deep into already the time protected for audience participation and questions and answers. Kris.
It's Dharma. Okay. There is a way to walk down here. There is, right actions are the thing to do. I've looked a lot deep into secret societies and looked at them as a social historian, looked at their members and different things. And one thing that you find is that they don't know their own mind a lot of times. They get very much into cognizant dissonance. Okay, I was talking with one of the, a daughter, both her father and her grandfather were members of the Order of Skull and Bones. And she would be just amazed because he would be talking socialist things, and then he would be talking very heavy capitalist things and whatnot. And when you look at these people that are members of these secret societies, they go insane. Okay, they are not looking for our best interests. Okay, and the Kennedy assassination, when I look at it very, very hard, okay, I see ducks that were put in a row before he was even elected. Okay, and if you look at Kennedy, the name means wounded head. Okay, and so they're taking these overarching archetypes, okay, to smash. They smash our archetypes, and then they try and bring it back up in a different direction. Okay, and it behooves us as the people that are being ruled, okay, to stand up on our own 2 feet and demand, okay, that our republic, that our democracy operates as a republic democracy rather than this game. I mean, they're playing a huge, big psychological warfare game to get us into all these positions. Okay.
And I'm in the position of moderator, Kris. Dare I try to wrap you up to open it up to questions?
I'm almost done. I mean, basically, the understand, one thing the internet has done, it is just broke down all kinds of walls. Okay. And, the idea that, money rules us. Okay. Is what is money? I mean, the whole idea of what monies are break. I mean, there's whole kinds of change happening, and it behooves us to, just continue on with our struggle to be free.
Well, I am going to claim the freedom to say this. You just brought together a couple of huge strands of this whole conversation in a very empowering way for me, which is they're insane. As members of the secret societies can go insane. the use of force drives rulers insane. And the solution for each individual is taking responsibility for every single thought that we think. So there's the aberration. Rulers go insane because they are trying to use force, which is a violation of, I think, natural law or human law or dharma, the right way to walk, being nice to each other, and also going along with someone else's plans and priorities, believing authority. That's the rub. It's not taking responsibility for the moral implications of every thought I think, every word out of my mouth, every action. So with that, I do want audience to wave or unmute, say my name, I'll identify. Kris is pointing.
John Olson wants to talk a little bit about JFK and the unspeakable.
Take it away, John.
Okay, thank you very much. I may be the most senior member here. I heard several people say they were in their 70s. Next April, I'll be 80, so I'm not sure where that fits with everybody else. But I knew Jim Douglas. Has everybody read JFK and the Unspeakable? Okay, yeah. I see some nodding. I don't know if everybody. Well, I knew Jim Douglas when he was a young philosophy professor in Hawaii, because we were both very much involved with the anti-war, anti-draft movement at the time. So he was a colleague and a friend in the late 60s. So we were involved in assisting the anti-war GIs and so forth. And in the book, he talks about having been advised by Dorothy Day, the founder of the Catholic Worker Movement, study the life of John Kennedy. And she had related to him a time when she and a few of the Quakers had met with John Kennedy to encourage him to scale down the rhetoric and the actions against the Soviet Union and try to at least coexist. They thought it was probably a futile task because he had been known as one of the Cold Warrior types going into the presidency. And so at the end of the conversation, he said in a very prescient manner, he said, "You believe in redemption, don't you?" And from then on, he began to wind down the militaristic behavior of the Eisenhower Dulles regime, including, of course, this may have been before or after the Bay of Pigs. I don't know exactly when this was, but this made a big impression on Jim Douglas, but he filed it away in his head until must have been in the 1980s. He began to, or even later, he began to research the life of John Kennedy. And the book that he came up with was, of course, JFK and the Unspeakable. And he's now working on and nearing completion of a similar book on Robert Kennedy, Malcolm, and Martin. Wow. I'm in touch with him periodically by phone or by letter. So a couple of other things. I like the phrase imperial dementia that the lady mentioned. I didn't get her name.
Late stage imperial dementia.
You're both speaking at the same time. I didn't get that.
Oh, late stage imperial dementia.
Late stage, yes, imperial dementia, exactly. Yeah. And one thing that we need to recognize, the people that are in charge of this monstrosity are psychopaths, and we cannot reason with them. Sure. They need to be removed from power. That's a critical thing. And I'm a big fan of dialectical change, where the internal contradictions is what eventually generates a rather explosive change. One thinks of volcanoes where magma builds up pressure, or an earthquake, it builds up pressure, and then suddenly there's an explosion of physical matter in one way or another. Well, and there's also the thing of the polar shift, where the South Pole magnetically becomes the North and vice versa. That happens every so many thousand years. We are undergoing a political polar shift. The Republicans are now finally waking up to what empire is about, and the liberals are embracing it in terms of their attitude toward this entire vaccination routine, which we think is way off the deep end, to say it politely.
What would you say to the metaphor of the baby being strangled by a fetus that has outlived its usefulness, John? Did you like that metaphor, and how would you speak to that?
Well, I'll refer you to this book that I brought over here. I'll put this up here so people can see it.
Sacred Instructions.
Yes, by Sherry Mitchell, who is a Penobscot elder here in Maine. Well, not that old, but she's one of the really wise women who has great insights. And she uses that same analogy of we are in a birth process, which is messy and painful.
Mm.
And she goes into some really revealing things, including that her own children had chosen her to be their mother. And also that 7 generations ago, the elders of like Sitting Bull and the other great chiefs of that time had said, eventually the young whites will come to us for wisdom. And that is what happened at Standing Rock.
Mhm.
Well, I love that. And I could keep asking you questions, John. I want to see if others want to ask or
We have a
contribute.
chat question, I think that. has
We'll
been-
do it. How is Jim these days? I think we covered everything in the chat, Liz.
Well, the
Which one?
JFK, is, the reference to Camelot, I thought was actually. a new
Anyone want to comment on that?
John.
Well,
Yeah, well, I think that actually was one of the reasons we brought up the history of the connection going back to the marriage of the first Fitzgerald, Gerald, to Princess Nest, who was considered to be a part of the Celtic mythology connecting back to King Arthur, and that whole movement came out of that area. And so there is a reality, especially I think for for the again, for what we're building to with the Fitzgeralds is what happened in the 16th century. You go from the 1170, the Norman invasion. You start with the family in 1100, 1170, the Norman invasion, eventually becoming more Irish than the Irish, and then eventually completely a genocide is committed against them by Queen Elizabeth. And you talk about, a sacred sacrifice. Well, it happened back then. So you can see, this is all wrapped up with the Grail, and the myths surrounding the Fitzgerald family are rather powerful that way.
I'm Kris, real quick.
Camelot, if you're going to kill the king, okay, you have to make the population think that the president's a king, okay? And you refer to him as Camelot, and he's this, virile guy. I mean, it brings him into a king so that you can then kill him.
And I see that. Absolutely. And Charlotte and then Sarah, but real quick to Camelot, Jackie Kennedy was quoted in Life magazine within a month after the assassination, and that put the Camelot tag on Kennedy's administration for history since then, to most intents and purposes. Was that coincidental? Was Jackie intentionally seeding some clue, Liz, along the lines of this history? That'll be.
They called it Camelot before then. It was called Camelot,
I was unaware.
The reference, I think the reference is
great.
kind of common.
Then somehow it was already being seeded to set up the impact of killing the king, it seems.
Right.
Charlotte?
Right. I don't know if the heretics, like the one who wrote that note to us, needed to have any reference to Camelot to want to kill a Fitzgerald, who was, there were already a genocide against the Desmond Fitzgeralds by Queen Elizabeth. So there was precedent for that already, 400 years earlier.
Right. But without this wisdom, it might fall under the hagiography, the worshiping, the adoration of JFK, as opposed to, wait a second, there's a bigger implication there.
You just had the musical Camelot that just come out just before Kennedy too.
This is true. This is very true.
They actually said Jackie Kennedy was the one who publicized that connection the most.
Mhm.
in Life
After the
magazine, yeah,
assassination.
within a month after yeah.
Right.
But
I always
before,
found The Lion in Winter more interesting than Camelot. So The Lion in Winter, the movie Lion in Winter, or the play Lion in Winter,
yeah,
I think it was more accurate description of what life was really like.
wonderful.
Right.
All right, back to some good moderating here by yours truly. Charlotte, if you'll unmute, we're ready for your comment or your question.
Cheers.
Okay. I agree with John about the dialectical nature that we're in, and I do think we're on the verge, I hope, of a big, more global embracement, discovery, et cetera, that you've been talking about. I just wanted to add a few things about JFK. You've heard me talk about this book before, but Thy Will Be Done, which is co-authored by Jerry Colby, mostly by him and by me, 18 years of work. Here it is. The Conquest of the Amazon, Nelson Rockefeller and Evangelism in the Age of Oil. Now, what I want to say about this is that some people that know this book well have called it the best book on the JFK assassination. You may be startled to hear this. We did not broadcast. We just put our information in there. And one of the things that we have in there is a chart. This is on page 328. I'll tell you what it is. It's a chart showing high Kennedy appointments from the Rockefeller network. And we just showed them. Everyone that was involved in devising foreign policy and national security strategy were from the Rockefeller networks. When I showed this book and this chart to one of the developers of the film on JFK, I'm sorry, what's his name, Phil? We've all been talking about it. Yeah, Oliver Stone's. When I showed the chart to one of the research, he blanched and he said, "Oh my God, they're all involved in the cover-up." Now, if you read this book carefully, then another way to approach the Kennedy assassination is from the idea of the exigencies of empire that Nelson Rockefeller was thrown into. It's not like he wanted necessarily the genocide of Indians to happen, but he got involved in developing the family empire in Latin America. And the exigencies of empire, which comes out of the growth of late capitalism, is what drove him to do horrendous things in Latin America.
What would you say to bring it right up to the moment? And then anyone else also address this question, if you don't mind, Charlotte. What would most help, or might most help, the vast majority of humanity who is really upset, confused, horrified, scared, confused of the events of the last, I'm going to say 20 years, in terms of powerlessness, to bring on this renaissance, this birth of a whole new, let's get very idealistic and romantic here, you know, a golden era of health and freedom for humanity?
Well, first of all, I agree with you on the idea of the Renaissance. I think it's coming.
What would be
It
the tangible
came out of the
couple of
Black
things?
Death, by the way. It's coming
It-
out now. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I stepped into your words. What one or two or three strategies or intents or areas of research, Charlotte, and then I'm going to ask others the same thing, could help empower this baby to throw off the suffocating fetus that has lived too long?
We have to look at the ruling class. The ruling class, that's a term, you know, you're not supposed to use that word. It's going to brand you. You have to look at the ruling class. The ruling class has hidden, and you're all, you know, you guys listen, Paul, you know what I'm talking about. I mean, yeah, and they may have their mystical background too. And that is what unites the right with the left. I mean, I went to a conference, a decade ago, and it was all about trying to understand the power research and the 1%. And there were actually some conservatives sitting in there. That is what unites it. That's what gets people to understand what's really at stake.
And that's why it's, you know, a privilege to be in Kris Millegan's world and have my book published by him, because Kris, your mission is to, expose the folks in the shadows who are reaching down from the secret societal level to have their way with us, play us against each other. And I'll open this question to anyone who wants to address it very specifically. Besides learning the truth behind the scenes of current events and even recent history of the Kennedy assassination, boy, it's tough not to give a big sermon because I got a lot of opinions myself about what I'm asking here. Take it away, somebody along the lines of him. Yes,
I wanted
Liz.
to comment on Charlotte. I think you really hit the nail on the head about, we do have a future to look forward to, but my theory is that what's keeping this old process clinging is because it really hasn't been ended properly. There is a correct way for something to end, and that was the point. When we keep the engine going, the revenge and retribution cycle has got to end. Somebody who deserves to, lash out at the world for the cruel things done to them and their family has got to say, this is it. I'm the one in my family who's going to end it. And that's Paul, okay, as a Fitzgerald. That's what he's saying. That's what we said in our article in 2016 that this heretic responded to. We said it is time for the cycle to end. We can't keep justifying killing something for something that happened 1,000 years ago.
Oh, isn't the best way, or a very effective way to do that, Liz, is exactly what we're doing here, which is to make this conscious, make it more well known, because as I like to say, something will happen when enough of us know.
Yeah.
Because those who are trying to cling to power and use revenge and use force against each other, they're going to continue doing that unless enough folks who let authority do their thinking for them, let media do their thinking for them, start to get challenged by folks like us to ask, why do you think what you think? Why do you allow what you allow? It comes down to the moral responsibility. We can no longer just follow orders from those we think we need to defer to. And that's what I would tell that baby who's struggling to become more robust, more awake, and to say, I'm ready to get out of this cocoon, please.
Yeah.
I'm ready to take some steps. I'm ready to scream and sing and shout.
Yeah, I agree.
If I might say something real quick.
Absolutely.
My research has always shown that certain families are sacrificial families, and they do that very willingly. And then they rise up to be an elite group like the other elites, and there's a switch around. And I think when families were larger, that was more accepted. Now there are a lot of different things, especially since the end of World War II. Families are smaller. People aren't so willing to even send their children off to war. That the draft ended. I think that was something really important. And, fighting these wars became kind of a choice. There's a certain amount of brainwashing where they tell you, oh, you're going to be a hero. You'll have a job in the army.
Sarah,
but I think that people have to get a deeper understanding of how these elites have worked. And, the remark about Kissinger with Nixon is interesting because Nixon didn't come from an elite group. The Bushes are a powerful elite group. They've managed to hide themselves for generations. But I taught at Texas A&M, which was Bush country. George and Barbara, for some reason, they really latched on to Texas A&M. And it is like a cult there. They have a library that's not a library. It's a cult worship of the Bush dynasty. It's chilling to go there and see it. The grandson, George P., used to periodically show up at faculty meetings, and this 30-something nobody person would be lecturing really highly educated people about the future of the Bush dynasty that we were supposed to accept. And I remember just sitting in these meetings laughing because he's an idiot. He's a real estate agent. He joined the Navy simply to have this background so that he can go into national politics at some point. I think you just have to stand up and start pointing. Not only is the king very dangerous, but the king has no clothes.
Sarah,
Yes.
real quick. Your first thing about some families are sacrificial and then they become prominent. I've seen that in either maybe with the Hinckleys, maybe with the Bin Ladens.
The Hinckley thing is a
Wait,
very interesting
But
connection.
just to make this point, why would a family, well, if it's for the sake of rising to power, feeling that you earned it, we paid the price. We sacrificed one of our own. So now the next generation, we get to rise up to a position of power. The
Exactly.
rub, the thing that the burr under the saddle is, such families might do that so that they could have their turn being the ones at the top who get to inflict force on others. And Liz and Paul, for all these roundtables and all of our planning, and I'm circling this because I'm watching the time and the clock, and it's to give us a reality check and not just have a BS detector, but to have a use of force detector to eradicate that, to spot that as the thing to eradicate. The idea that anyone can or should elevate themselves to the position of being able to inflict force on others. That is such a quintessentially opposite from an American idea. The solution is the American idea of the consent of the governed. And I want to put that on the table as a point to ponder for all of us as something we can practically do, because it ties right back into, why do I think what I think? Why do I put up with what I put up with? Because I'm powerless. You can't fight City Hall. Why do I think that? And obviously, those folks of us here want to accept the challenge that everybody can do something and everyone should try. John, I see your hand. What have you?
Okay, just I'll putting things on the chat. I won't repeat that, but it occurred to me a day or two ago when these public officials take an oath to defend the Constitution as a solemn oath. Isn't that a contract with those who have elected them?
Mhm.
It seems to me it is.
Mhm.
And if they break their contract flagrantly, blatantly, isn't that grounds for removal?
I would think. And you're also highlighting or responding to the fact I just brought up, the Constitution or American premises, political premises, and how so much lip service is given to them during election seasons. And we see people get sworn in and swear to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. And yet, for many intents and purposes, it was ripped up after 9/11 with the USA Patriot Act and with the Department of Homeland Security. I've been saying in a number of conversations lately, America doesn't exist anymore. America exists where folks live under the Constitution. We pretend it does, but we've got to, each of us, identify as a Minuteman, not with a weapon, but with the notion that we have to do what we would like a president or representative to do. We have to understand, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution verbally with love, before we expect anybody else to.
Well,
Yes.
I think that one of the problems that we have to really confront is this ability to, to end the Constitution under certain circumstances has always existed. Anytime there is an emergency, and of course we used to think of that as a state of war, like in World War II, when Roosevelt basically, allowed Japanese Americans to be put in concentration camps for what? For being Japanese Americans. They did nothing.
And we've been in a state of emergency since 9/11, right?
No, it's not just that. So, but the state right now, we are in endless war. So the endless war now justifies endlessly. So we have to address the original problem, which is there should never be a reason why the constitutional right should ever be abrogated. Zero. Okay.
Yes.
That is obviously, we've got to have the right language and the right approach to what the source of the problem is. The Hegelian dialectic basically gives the state the power to do exactly what it's doing today, which is use violence against its own people if it sees fit to do it. We have to deal with that reality, that they cannot have that power.
So as I say, one empire under surveillance with deceit and oppression for all.
Right.
Well said, John.
When you use force for the good, okay, at some point you're going to use it for evil. I guarantee it. Okay, so that clearly is sort of a mantra. But when we're talking about an endless war, we are now in endless war, which is the constant use of force. So it's like a disease now that's taken over.
Well, I'm not going to take over, Liz, but I'm going to challenge you and Paul to start taking notes for next month's roundtable to dive into the concept you've raised earlier. And I'm paraphrasing that each individual is the star of our individual story, and to take responsibility, which is a theme this whole roundtable, for why do I think what I think? Why do I allow what I allow? Is it because I go along, I feel powerless, it's just a habit my whole life, whatever the experts on television are saying, I go along with, and to take personal responsibility for not only the state of our mind, emotions, and happiness and comfort in our own skin. Do we have to get drunk? Do we have to do drugs in order to be us and get through day by day like so many anxiety-ridden and fear-filled humans? And then to take responsibility for having conversations about what kind of a life do we want? What kind of a country do we want? What kind of a community we want toward peace, happiness, love, health, freedom. And I'll make it very specific with this example. For arguably lies, the American government, which functions in our name, which supposedly represents us, commits crimes, atrocities, and abuse here and around the world. And because we feel powerless, you can't fight City Hall. We don't say, hey, that's unacceptable. There, I've put all my cards are on the table. Who wants to pick up with a comment or a question in the dwindling few moments that we have? Charlotte, I see
Charlotte.
you.
Yeah, I just want to bring to your attention a wonderful book about fighting City Hall. So, and it's by Kucinich. I don't know if you're aware, I had to review it. I reviewed it for Counterpunch. Wait a minute. The division of light and power. You know, he ran for mayor of Cleveland and he became very famous because he was absolutely dogged in trying to protect the public utility. And in the process of his fight, he discovered who the ruling class was in Ohio and in Cleveland. And so what he's done in this book, which was recently published, is he lays out his whole struggle and how he discovered these forces. And I think this is a great way for people to apply what we've been talking about at the local level. You can fight City Hall, but you got to know who you're fighting and you got to understand their power.
When did that book come out, Charlotte?
It just came out probably 6 months ago. And then, of course, he ran again.
Well, we're going to do
mayor and he lost. But it's a great book.
Thank
Anyone
you.
who cares about city politics should read it.
Right, because we sometimes very intentionally say we've got to talk about solutions by the end of the roundtable, and decentralization and making things local, and where can we show up at the school board or at something about like our utilities. Thank you for mentioning that book. Who else has? I'm gonna ask the panel, unless I see other urgent hands, to here's your opportunity to kind of conclude. Sarah, I see you.
Yeah, I just want to say quickly with Charlotte, it's really important to remember there's a famous saying, I think Strom Thurgood said it, all politics is local. It doesn't matter. Everything has a locus and it blows out from there. The other thing I'd like to say about both of Fitzgeralds is I think you are a living example. I mean, your ancestors would probably just be running squirrels listening to you right now, because dynasty and kingdoms and power was what they were all about, especially in Ireland. And the very fact that you have made the veil between your world and their world a very thin one, and yet you still come up on the side of goodness and light. You've chosen a narrative of the Grail, which is positive, uplifting, a humanitarian movement, really. So
Sarah,
it shows that bloody families can be transcended.
Well,
It takes consciousness and determination.
we actually did
love.
go, we met the Knight of Glen in 1997, who's also happens to be the Black Knight. And when we were in Ireland, and the first thing he said to Liz was, "What were you thinking joining this crazy family?"
mm,
So
I had no idea. where
she
that
had
was
no
going.
idea, and at the time I wasn't quite all that up on it either. But I've come to learn that there's a lot there to be done, and I think that I've kind of identified with that Fitzgerald aspect of JFK all my life as a little kid, and I am an old kid now, and I think that what Kris is doing, and Bruce and Kent and the rest of our crew here and everybody, thank you very much for participating in this experience. But I think Liz focused on the key word. The key word is personal. It comes down at the end of the day, it comes to you. And I don't happen to like being pushed around. I never have on my entire life. And I can't tell you how I feel about the way we are living in, and what we are being forced to live with right now is the antithesis of what we have been raised to believe about ourselves, what we have been raised to believe about being Americans and being human beings. And we're going to have to hit a point where everybody feels the same way and pushes back. And when they do, I'm going to tell you, the powers that be will run in fear.
Well, pushing back the right way, though.
yeah. And before I give Sean and then Kris the last words, Sarah, remind everyone, please, the title of your TrineDay book.
Royal Vengeance.
Subtitle.
It's about the blood cult that rules the royal families. It's still a blood cult that's very much alive today, even though
Royal
they try it.
Vengeance. Royal Vengeance subtitle, The Assassination of
Yes.
Princess Diana and the Royal Cult of
Blood cult.
Human Sacrifice.
Sacrifice.
Thank you,
Yes.
Sarah. Sean, do you want the opportunity to say or ask any concluding observations?
Me?
It's John Olson. I think
No,
it was John
I
Olson wanted to say
threw it
something?
to Sean. We're wrapping up, John, with the panel. Sorry.
I mean, I think everyone has spoken their mind, and I think we're pretty clear at this point as far as as far as the socio-pathology of the ruling elite, and the question, of course, becomes how long until we can evolve beyond that. I do believe that this new world order rolling out, as I was speaking of earlier, it's like this world order has to, in a sense, become manifest and tangible for people, so that those of us who've been talking for decades about conspiracies and this, the potential conspiracies, now people are seeing it. And the irony is, a lot of them don't care. But the truth is that if they don't care, then they're not meant to inherit the world that is to come. I do believe that there's a spiritual quality to this whole thing, this spiritual war, that you have to stand into your sovereignty. And if you can't do it, if you don't want to do it, then you're not meant to be here to partake of what we get to enjoy, once this system comes down. If you're sitting here waiting for orders, waiting to be told what to do, you may go with that dying system. And so this is the choice point. And that's why America, as you mentioned earlier, Bruce, about, the importance of America, it's clear America is the only country in the modern world where the people, again, it was all a bunch of white landowners. Well, it doesn't matter. The principle was there. The principle of people saying we endow the government with powers because we ourselves are endowed by a higher power. That's unique in human history. Maybe since thousands of years ago, I don't know, but I'm saying in the modern world, that's what's unique about America. And all these people hate America so much and are coming out, especially amongst the left in particular, to destroy it because they're playing upon, as you talked about, America had racism, we had slavery, we had this. Beat yourself over, like those priests, beat yourself in the back, you must, pay retribution for it. No, we don't. We need to step into the promise of what America gave us with the Constitution, with the Declaration, with that spirit, to say we the people are endowed by a creator higher than any person upon this planet, higher than any being on this planet. No king gave us that right. No government gives us our rights. And I've traveled the world and I hear people, the government tells us what to do. Not in America. And that spirit has to be felt everywhere in the world. And this is why it's so important that America stands in this time period. We have to prevail as a nation, even if it's just a few states that remain. As long as we preserve that constitutional integrity, that spirit, the whole world can follow. And then America becomes the beacon on a hill that was promised. And that is the true destiny of this country.
Beautifully said.
Bravo.
Well said, well said.
Beautifully
And
said.
with that, I invite our host, Kris Millegan, to share.
Change is happening. I mean, we're, 20, 30 people here, and there's a lot of people that are getting together and are talking about this. And there's a lot of change that is happening, and it is going to happen. It is bound to happen. And yes, America is very, very important. The hell that our founding fathers went through to understand what it means to have your own country as a republic, as with democratic institutions, and change. Change is happening, and and it is up to us to direct that change. Okay, because we all have control of our own actions. That's really the only thing that we have control over, is our own direct actions. And so the thing to do is to, again, we have a planet, okay? We have one planet here. We need to treat it nice, or it won't be nice to us. And we need to treat our brothers and sisters as ourselves. I mean, it's not like we don't know what to do. It's not like, people haven't said, hey, here's how we can have a nice, happy, peaceful world. Okay. But you have people that are using very sophisticated tools, okay, to move us. Again, I talk about this all the time about having us fight each other, but that's where it starts. They play us into camps. And with the internet, it's really taken away a lot of their secrecy. They don't have, a lot of secrets. Okay. What they have right now and what they're exercising is raw power. Okay. And we need to talk to where they exercise this power, such as the media. Okay. And we need to, continually to try and get those people that are working for the media to start working for the people instead of their bosses. And, and start, how many, I got very mad last night at the TV, because somebody was sitting there trying to tell me that James K. Earl killed Martin Luther King, and again, they have these PowerPoints, you might say. I mean, that they have to maintain that Lee Harvey Oswald killed Kennedy. They have to maintain that 9/11 was done by 19 Arab hijackers. Okay, but these guys were just all patsies. What does a patsy do? He puts a frame around himself and dies. Okay, and they're just trying to push these points onto us. And we have to just continue to resist and try and get the people who are working for them to stop and start working for us. That's all I have to say. Onwards.
And I always encourage folks to go to TrineDay.com, buy a book. If you want to know what books to buy, go to the podcast. Kris has interviewed almost 70 of his authors in the last 15 months, once a week, about 30 minutes long. Discover an amazing book and spread the word. Good things will happen when more of us know more truth about what's going on. And as Kris said,
onwards. Onwards.
Thank you all.
Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.